Good morning, everyone.
Okay,
Can you hear me all right? Good morning, everyone. Can you
Yes, we
hear me all right? Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Trudy. Good morning, all. And thank you for joining for yet another Tech Drop-In session. Today, we are going to talk about the simplicity that Veritas brings in for your orchestration and recovery operations. Now, before we start, I am going to quickly do a check on if the slides are visible all right. Trudy, awesome. Thank you, Trudy. Awesome. All right. So what are we going to do today? So we have a demo planned. I'm expecting to run a 25-minute session, including the demo. Maybe we stretch a little bit further from 25. That's fine. But the intention here is to give you an opportunity to ask questions. We want to make sure that you have the right forum and you have the platform to ask questions regarding data management, regarding the topic for today, or even anything that is in this data management space or what the market is asking. So we have a list of topics to cover today, but I'll of course welcome you to ask any question that comes to your mind in terms of the data management space. Please use the Q&A section in the WebEx to ask for the questions. And more importantly, what we're doing today is the best question of the day is going to get a JB Hi-Fi voucher worth $50. What we will do is we will look at all the questions that come in today, and we will have a quick judgment at the end of the session, and the winner, we'll reach out to the winner of this contest after we finish the session. And when we are sharing the slides with you later on is when we will bring out the winner as well. So, there's an incentive to ask your questions. No question is a silly question. Feel free to go ahead. To help you answer the questions, I have Jeff Coley with me and Rob Blachetta. Jeff is the Director of Architecture and Systems Engineering in Veritas, and Rob is our subject matter expert in data management. And I will be presenting today on the simplicity of recovery with Veritas. All right, with that said, let's get started. The session is going to be recorded, and we will share the recording as we come to an end, and the slides will be shared to you as well. And in the meantime, if you have questions, again, please put in those questions in the chat window, or Rob and Jeff will help me run with the questions, and I will take breaks in between to look at the questions. All right, so how is our IT infrastructure looking today? And I found a very good picture here, which gives me a perspective. And this is what a lot of people tell me is IT infrastructure has evolved from virtual machines to containers to, the latest serverless solutions. However, the physical machines, the Solaris machines, the Unix machines still exist. So as we grew, as we went, migrating and transforming our infrastructure, this is where we've landed up. Now, it's not something that just I am observing or a few of us are observing. Even the market analysts are saying the same thing. What we hear from the analysts is 66% people in the IT industry consider that the complexity has just gone up. And it's not just about data growth. It's not just about new technology coming in. It's actually the number of processes that come in. It's also dependent on the number of devices that have come in. And it's a function of how many people interact when it comes to performing a task. And that's where service orchestration and disaster recovery comes through. I'm going to walk you through a simple example in terms of a day in a DR admin's life, a disaster recovery administrator's life, when a disaster or disruptive event occurs. And this is a fairly simplified view of what really happens behind the scenes. I'm sure each one of us here has seen multiple of such events, and you could probably correlate into the commotion that it creates in the organization. So with that said, here is 5 entities. Now, please do note that the colors have no resemblance into the previous wire ball that we saw, but it just is an indicator. But then, I have called out just 5 actors in this sequence diagram. The first actor is, of course, the disaster recovery administrator, who is the single throat to choke when things don't recover in time. Then we also have the virtual machine or the infrastructure administrator. There is a backup admin in place. There is an application or a DB admin in place, as well as in most of the scenarios, you will also have a cluster admin in place. Now, these are just 5 simple actors in this particular scenario. Of course, these could be teams. Each actor here could represent a team with multiple people and multiple ownership modules. But just to keep it simple, I've just taken 5. Now, on the left, I have the timeline, and let's see what happens. So if an event occurs, if there is something that goes bad and you really need to recover. Now, the recovery process has to be initiated by the DR admin. Obviously, he's going to be the one who starts picking up the phone and get some level of orchestration going. So he's going to reach out to the VM admin to invoke a recovery of the virtual machines. Now, VM admin is going to see, can I restore from a backup? Can I restore from a snapshot? And he's going to start that activity. As part of the restore process, the VM admin is actually going to go back into the backup admin and ask for a restore. Now, we've already seen 2 levels, jump from the DR admin. And now the backup admin comes in. He's starting to work together. And the backup admin then continues with his task. The DR admin then parallelly reaches out to the application guys. The application guys now start looking at what are their recovery options and how can they recover it from a consistent state. That's where they might just go to the cluster admin and ask for invoking a failover or a migration of that particular application into your highly available or DR site. Now, within the first invocation piece, we have seen 5 levels of just outward communication. There is absolutely no acknowledgement that any of these tasks have been done. Now, these return acknowledgements can come in parallel. They can come, independent, or they can come one after the other. Now, the DR admin is just pulling out his hair because it's just going to go in and completely asynchronous fashion. He has no clue. Now, in this example, I'm expecting, and my fingers crossed, that all the acknowledgements are coming okay. But imagine if one of them goes bad. Imagine if one of those goes wrong. And at the end of all of that is when we don't even know how long this process is going to take. And that's why my recovery time objective, which is called out here, is just T0 when the issue hit plus n hours, or it could be days, you never know. And that's where I am, I'm getting to a point where is this process predictable? Is this process going to give me the confidence that I can repeat this if something happens? Am I willing to take that risk, or do I have the confidence that I can get out of a situation if it hits me? Definitely not predictable. Is this controllable? Once I have started to communicate across the board, can I control or measure how the whole thing is happening? Absolutely not. I'm just dependent on somebody else to perform that task. And these things could be scripted, but the scripts are eventually going to let us into the same state where we are dependent on somebody else to run the script. Can I monitor it? Absolutely not. Monitoring here just becomes a phone call to somebody else who's just monitoring and looking at the screen. That's where the whole recovery time objective just goes for a toss. Now, having the ability to really look into a performant IT service platform, an ability to engage with multiple stakeholders without really having that direct dependency and without losing the predictability in the environment, without having to worry about the dependencies and having to have that ability to control the entire system and bring a measurability factor in terms of my recovery and resiliency solutions. And it's not about your virtual machines. It's not about your databases. As we saw, there are 5 different actors at minimum. So it's about IT service platform that needs to hang together and then give you the ability to be confident on your recovery process, make it a repeatable process. If a DR auditor calls you and asks you to repeat a process in a test environment, can you really do it? That's where we need to identify how best we can make it predictable as well as repeatable. Where are my risks? If it is going to fail, is it going to fail at the end, at the beginning, in the middle? That's where I need to know. Am I going to lose data? How much data am I going to lose? That's where my risks are. And is my DR data center even ready to cater my entire workload? Maybe I've not even factored in that thing at all. So capacity versus demand becomes the biggest challenge. Controllability, again, is around what is my RPO and RTO in an event like this. Now, objective here is to again be within your SLAs so that you don't really have an impact on your brand image or you're not fined for SLA violation. And then most importantly, all of this needs to be measured all at once and make sure I have the right level of decision making capability built in. All right. With that said, I probably have set a good introduction in terms of what are the challenges we see and we hear from our enterprise and SMB customers around challenges for recovery and recovery orchestration. With that said, I'm going to get into our demonstration. I promised to not spend too much time on slides, so I'm going to jump into the presentations. Quick check, Rob, any questions so far before I jump into my presentation?
Yeah, look, I mean, we've got one question. So Tim's asked the question, can this functionality be integrated with Netbackup to automate the restores?
Brilliant, and I'm so happy that that question has come in because we are going to see one of those use cases in the demo. Awesome. All right. Thanks, Tim, for that question. We will look at it. All right. Quick check, Rob. Is the screen resolution okay? Can you see my browser?
Looking good, mate. It's all up and fine.
Awesome. All right. Thank you. So here is the dashboard of Veritas Resiliency Platform. Now, Veritas Resiliency Platform is a service orchestration solution that is built on top of Veritas products. Now, we have an ability to orchestrate with Netbackup, just to give a quick short answer to Tim's question. And we not just Netbackup, but we are aiming for a multi-SLA orchestration solution. Now, this multi-SLA orchestration solution really comes down into those three key factors as we looked at it: predictability, controllability, and measurability. So let's look at the dashboard first. Now, what you can see here is I have two data centers configured. Just for the sake of this demo, I have one data center sitting in my London location, and you can see that I can quickly look at what my current status is in terms of the London data centers. It says that your vCenter servers are all right, so that means the virtualization infrastructure is looking good. My second data center here is in New York. The New York data center also is running all right with virtual machines. It also gives me an indicator in terms of what my communication path looks like. So it says clearly that New York is communicating with London, all right, and vice versa. So that's the pairing part. I still have a few other dashboards here. Now, both data centers put together in this demo environment, it's fairly small. I've got 11 virtual machines. Out of that, there are 10 Windows, 10 Linux and one Windows virtual machine. Predominantly the environment is VMware. And we also look at errors. Now, these risks basically are the ones where you bring in the predictability. You bring in the ability to identify where your risks are. And we have the risks categorized in recoverability, continuity, and SLA. Now, what the recoverability risk means is my DR data center is currently not able to recover my workload. And this could mean that my second site is perhaps running low on compute resource. It's running low on storage, for example. That's where the recoverability risk comes in. Continuity is basically bringing out the risk on the current production environment. Is my current production environment having a risk of not being able to cater to the work? That's where you start seeing continuity risks. And then eventually we have SLA risks. That's where we talk about SLA violations. Now I'll get into the SLA violations in a minute. Now, with all of these, we have an ability to configure resiliency groups. Now, these resiliency groups are groups of applications and virtual machines put together. Now, as you can see here, I have 6 resiliency groups. And out of those 6 resiliency groups, all running currently in the New York data center, and out of which I can see that my first resiliency group, for example, I'm just going to take the web tier. And this web tier is being replicated from New York to London. So you can see that the replication link is set up. The replication link is active, and my data is in consistency as well as in sync with my production site. So the New York and London data center has 0 lag in between them. So if I invoke a recovery right now, that would mean that my London data center is going to be able to recover the virtual machines without losing any data. Now I'm monitoring this lag by using an RPO service objective. And for this workload, I have configured it to 5 minutes. As soon as my replication lag, it could be because of a network glitch, it could be because the application is suddenly pumping data, it could mean that my storage is not giving me the right throughput to perform the writes on the DR side. Any of the reason, if there is a risk on your SLA, immediately this particular trigger is going to be thrashed out, and you will start seeing an SLA risk here or an SLA violation here. On the right hand side, you see single click operations. Now, this is where the orchestration and the magic of or orchestration comes in. We have an ability to single click migrate this particular virtual machine or a group of virtual machines from one data center to the other. And that migration workflow is pre-built in the system. It is pre-configured. You don't really need to worry about building that workflow altogether. I'll show you a quick summary here. It says that last successful migration was run yesterday. I'm going to show you the migration. Now, if you see, it's a multi-step workflow. This multi-step workflow actually does a lot of things. The first thing, of course, is it communicates with the VMware ecosystem to perform a graceful shutdown and a graceful sync. It then performs some network operations. Now, obviously, when your virtual machine or an application is being migrated from one data center to the other, we are not really going to get the same network environment on the other site. It may be a stretched VLAN, that's great, but it may be a completely disjoint independent network by itself. In that case, somebody has to do the network monitoring and as well as customization, that an IP address, if it needs to be carried over or it needs to change when it goes there. If it needs to change, the DNS has to be updated. Who's going to do that? So the workflow is actually built to run all of these tasks. It's not just looking at your virtual machine. It's not just looking at your application. It is actually bringing the ecosystem up together. Now, that's where if I then expand all the steps that this workflow has done, you can see that there are at least 50 odd steps here, which are going from one data center virtualization vCenter server into the other vCenter server, which is coming into the second site. All right, I'm just going to come back. I don't know how the screen resolution played with me, but I'm just going to do this again. All right, so what we just saw was the ability for, hold on, not a good way of playing around with the screen resolution. There we go. All right. So this is just one of those operations where I can perform a single click migrate on a group of virtual machines. But that's not it. As we said that this virtual machine or a group of virtual machines may not be the only one. I need to make sure that the network ecosystem is mapped as well. Now, this was with an SLA of 5 minutes. We were replicating data and we had an SLA of 5 minutes. Now, we also have virtual machines which are currently sitting under Netbackup. Now, these Netbackup virtual machines, and as you can see here, are having backup images. these backup images are sitting in, I can clearly see that my London data center has a backup image which can be used from yesterday. And if I need to run a recovery or a restore, I can just pick the same image, or I can choose whichever image in the timeline. Now here you can see that there are two virtual machines sitting on the Netbackup environment. The beauty of this solution is just like we had a single click migrate operation, here I have a single click restore operation. Now that restore operation is actually going to give me an ability to restore from a snapshot or a VM backup, which has been taken in the past. All right, so what I am now going to do is I will talk to you about the users. Now that we've seen the assets and how the assets are configured, we will quickly take a look at the users. And in the user management, you can see that I have something called as personas and jobs. Now I have configured personas where the application admin comes in, and I can now look at what are the rights for the application admin. You can see that the application admin can now perform a migrate or a recover operation on a particular application or a residency group. A backup admin can do backup operations, control backup operations. A DR admin can actually do a lot more things in the whole gamut of things. And then I will also have a virtual machine admin. Now this virtual machine admin is accountable for doing only this one, accountable for only doing virtual machine operations. So he's going to manage virtual machines, manage servers, and so on and so forth. So, if you then compare the entire user and the sequence diagram that we spoke in the beginning, we have now just simply mapped all of those users in this console. So all of them have now done their part, and as part of their role-based access control, they've now got us to a state where I have my applications configured. Now let's look at let's look at one of these operations per se. Now I'm going to go into one of these workloads. This was Netbackup. I also have a virtual machine. Now what I'm going to do now here is I'm going to initiate a rehearsal. Right, a rehearsal. Now the beauty of rehearsal is without really needing to bring down your production workload. Rehearsal is going to take you from your current DR data center. We are going to take a data snapshot and we are going to instantiate that virtual machine from that snapshot within a network bubble. Now, the advantage of doing this is then you don't really affect your production workload. Your production machine just continues to run, and my DR site will have a copy of this production workload run and instantiated automatically in a network bubble. And when I say in a network bubble, I will show you how that network configuration looks like. Now here, if you see, I have a virtual machine which has the production network mapped as my London production VLAN. And I also have a rehearsal VLAN, which is where the rehearsal instances will come up. Now, this is how we've configured it between the two sites. If somebody runs a rehearsal, this is how the rehearsal could look like. Now, I'm going to fire one of those rehearsals, and it takes a few minutes. So I'm not going to wait until the rehearsal happens. So currently, it's running on New York. I'm going to run a rehearsal on London, and we will let that process complete. And again, as I said, these are custom workloads and custom workflows that come in. We don't really need to worry about it. If you see the rehearsal workflow, it says take a snapshot, register the virtual machine on the second vCenter, assign IP address, map the DNS, and get it started. So that's how a rehearsal would work. I will actually show you a rehearsal that I did on a Netbackup. Now, Netbackup rehearsal is basically a restore. I will go back into recent activities, and you can see that there is a workflow which looks like this. This workflow is nothing but a Netbackup virtual machine restore from an image that was backed up a day earlier. So here again, if I expand, you can see that this virtual machine was restored using the Netbackup REST APIs. And I can just quickly show you the process where the Netbackup restore comes through. This is where it is. And then this restore workflow is actually going to reach out into the Netbackup master and invoke a restore on that particular master. I can now go into the Netbackup ecosystem and the Netbackup master, and this is our Netbackup UI, is where you can see that one of those restore jobs must have fired for yesterday. And this is the simplicity that we can bring in. Yep, this is the restore, which happened yesterday. And this restore was initiated as part of the workflow. Now, that's the level of abstraction that a DR admin can get, that if he invokes a restore from the management console of Veritas Resiliency Platform, the job will automatically flow into Netbackup, and we should be able to see the job status from Resiliency Platform itself. So with that, I'm going to go back into the Resiliency Platform. Now, again, these are preliminary tasks. I didn't want to spend too much time on the preliminary automation tasks. I wanted to show you the flexibility and the ability to customize these solutions with workflow builders. That's where I wanted to spend time. So that's where we are. Rob, let me stop here and see if there are any questions.
Yeah, look, Amit, I was actually going to ask you a question around this. So really, is this something where we can start seeing using it like for like a disruptive event? Like, like we've got ransomware occurring more and more these days. How would you use VRP in that kind of sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely, and that's a good question. So here, if you look at it, I have, and maybe I'll not fire it, but if you see, I have an ability to actually run a restore based on multiple snapshots, right? And I can then decide which snapshot I want to use to run a restore or a rehearsal. Now, the same workflow can be run on workloads with multiple time frames, and then the restore is actually going to happen independent of the production workload. Now, in case of ransomware, what happens is, your backup being your immutable copy, your immediate recovery step is to restore from the backup. And that's where, first you run a rehearsal, an automated process that gives you the confidence that this backup is good enough for a restore. I'm not going to see the same encryption or the ransomware impact on this copy. So once you run the rehearsal, you get your chance to run the consistency checks in the network bubble network. And then eventually you have the ability to then, run the same thing in production. So you are clearly decoupling the impact and making sure that it doesn't flow through, the ransomware doesn't flow through into your DR processes. Make sense?
Total sense, mate. Total sense. We've also just got a couple of questions that have come through the Q&A as well. So I'll just read out. So Luciano, he's written in here. Does the VRP work in a hybrid environment with on-prem Hyper-V VMs and then on-prem to cloud and on-prem to cloud and cloud to cloud? So there's sort of three questions in that one question. So I guess the first one being, does it work with Hyper-V VMs is the first one.
Yes, the answer is yes. For the demo environment, I had virtual machines on VMware, but it works with Hyper-V VMs as well as physical machines. The second question, if I remember correct, the hybrid configuration. I will touch upon the potential, configurations. But yes, it works in a hybrid environment where I have my on-prem being a physical VMware or Hyper-V, and my cloud environment could be my DR target. And VRP is available in AWS and Azure Marketplace, but I'll come to that. And then from a cloud to cloud point of view, we do have solutions that do within region. So one region in AWS or one region in Azure takes you to the other region. That is in there, and if there is an ask or a use case where you want to go across clouds, there are ways to do that, and we are happy to have that follow-up discussion. Make sense?
Beautiful. Yeah, look, and we've just got a few other kind of questions coming through. I'll just probably just touch on these if we can.
Yep.
The next one as well was, can we extract specific files from the backup or only full restore of the VM?
Right. So I did have an instant access VM here. So we support full VM restores and instant access restore. And now objective here is not a tool or a mechanism to operate backups. The objective here is to tie your backups into your DR strategy. So we use instant access VMs as part of your quick recovery mechanism. Extracting files is more or less a backup function, not a complete DR. It's not a part of your DR workflow. So it can give you an ability to an extent where it fits into the DR workflow. Does that help? And Rob, happy for you to jump in as well.
Beautiful, mate. Thank you for that. And there's just two more quick ones that are in there as well, Ahmed, if you don't mind. So the next question was, can a rehearsal include multiple VMs all in the same isolated bubble, as they may need to communicate with each other to validate the test?
Absolutely. And the configuration of each of these resiliency groups is up to how we configure it and how we define it. Now, probably the next few use cases that I'm going to run is going to take it one step further. It's going to up level that conversation that, yes, there are going to be virtual machines which need to communicate with each other. But what happens if there are virtual machines which are dependent on each other? Right now, the dependencies need to be addressed. If I have a rehearsal running and if my virtual machine is dependent on an LDAP or an Active Directory, right, it makes much more sense to get the Active Directory migrated first and then the dependent applications. Now, that particular functionality is where we are going to go be over and above the capability that we just saw. And maybe, Rob, what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep going. And as soon as I finish my chartered walkthrough is when we'll come back to the questions. Okay?
Beautiful. No worries, mate. Perfect.
Awesome. All right. So as we saw here in the rehearsal that we had kicked off on the web application, that rehearsal has completed. It just says today. It took, if I go here, it says it took about 9:24 to 9:30. This is PST. My lab is hosted in the US. But so this is 9:24. So it took about 5 minutes and 40 seconds to finish. But again, no touch. I just let it go, and the whole rehearsal happened in the second side. Now, another thing, and I'm glad that the question came up on the hybrid and the cloud environments. Running rehearsals is good. You can continue validating on the cloud, but what if you forget? You don't want to be charged forever. That's where the simplicity the solution brings in is a single click cleanup. Now, once you're completed with your rehearsals or validations, all you need to do is run a workflow which is called cleanup rehearsal. Now, I don't want, now that my sandbox is done and fulfilled its job, I don't really care what happens to it as long as I'm not getting charged for it. Now, this particular process, which is cleanup rehearsal, actually gives you an ability to wipe off everything that you created as part of that rehearsal test. And it also asks you that if one of those fails, do you want me to continue to clean up? Which is the right thing to do, because now that the sandbox has finished its job, you don't really want, any stale or lingering assets or resources there. Now, that's why it's going to do a full cleanup. I'm going to just submit that here, and sorry, submit that here, and that we should be good to go. Right now, that cleanup will continue happening. I will probably I'll just show you the workflow here. This is how it starts, and then it'll continue. But okay, now we come back to our dependencies and multiple VMs operating. Now I will go back to the screen. Here is what we see as our assets. Now let's look at the first case where I have to put multiple virtual machines in a resiliency group. Now here, if you see the Netbackup resiliency group I have, it already has a couple of VMs. So, there is no limit. You can just keep adding as long as it makes sense for you to group together. I can put those virtual machines. Now, what happens is when the workflow is initiated, both these virtual machines are going to be fired in parallel for the operations. So there is going to be, two operations running in parallel. Now, if there was a dependency between these virtual machines, all I need to do is create a new resiliency group and configure dependencies. Now, I will talk about virtual business services. Now, virtual business services give you the flexibility of creating dependencies. Now, all I need to do is create a multi-tier application. Now, this is your multi-tier service, which may have different layers and dependencies. Now, here I'm going to say add 3 tiers. Typically, my web tier is always on the top. My app layer is always in the middle. I'm just, and it's just a drag and drop. You can put multiple of those as you want. And my bottom tier is going to be the database. So in sequence of operations, it means that whenever I'm starting up, my database needs to come up first. Once the data layer is up and running, I have my application or the data access layer built in. And then my web layer, which is your input into your application, will then come up. Now, it was as simple as dragging these three as long as I knew the relationship. Now, I could actually put in another few resiliency groups across. Depends on how your application structure is. And I can also configure some additional customizations, which here, if you can see, it says, is this an optional? Is this, if you within a tier, if you want to define dependencies, you can actually put in dependencies there. So here it might just be a much more reasonable use case here, where I could say that you can put in the dependencies within that particular tier as well. Now, I go next, and it is automatically now computing a start and stop order. Now, as you see, the start order is in the database. I had 2 resiliency groups. That's why it's just run those in parallel. After that, I have my app layer, and after that, I have my web layer, right? That's my start order, because start, I need to honor the database access, and then the web. On the contrary, my stop tier or stop application is going to do the opposite. It's going to get the web down first. So here you can see that my web is being the first one to be stopped. Then I have the DB stop, the app stop, and then I have the 2 DB stops, right? So now it's automatically built that workflow together. Now, if you just go ahead and complete, I can, introduce manual interventions. Now, one of those classic use cases is, hey, I'm migrating the whole thing, but can I do firewall changes as in part of the workflow? Yeah, you can certainly do your customizations, and we give you an ability to pause the workflow, finish your customization, and then run with the next or the remaining tasks. So, for now, I'm just going to leave it at that. I'm going to name this as my ERP system and submit. That's pretty much it. My business service is now created. Now, the beauty of this business service is once it is all set, it is now going to give you a clear view of what are the resiliency groups. Now, remember, each of these resiliency groups comprises of multiple applications. Each of these resiliency groups had their own migration and restore operations. And now this layer of orchestration has abstracted all of that. And now you can just say migrate. In this migrate, essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to migrate all these workloads in their this respective order or dependency from one side to the other using the technology that they use for data movement. So here I have one. So the database is using a cluster technology for replication. One of the virtual machine is using Netbackup for backup copies, and then the application VMs are using VRP native replication. Now you see that each of these tiers are having independent SLAs. Now NetBackup SLA is probably going to be 4 hours. The um, web tier, as we saw right in the beginning, had an SLA or an RPO of 5 minutes, and the cluster virtual machine or cluster database is going to have near zero RPO. So it's simply put, I can have a multi SLA orchestration delivered using a single workflow. Now, the moment I run this workflow, it's going to give me the ability to, orchestrate the migration. And for
Sorry, sorry, mate.
yes, Ram. Yes, Ram.
Just a quick one, mate. Just before you go too far ahead, mate. Just around the workflow itself, right? What kind of other dependencies can we map into that as well? Like with things like other kind of ancillary kind of functions like outside of the VM, like DNS and things like that. Can you just touch on that maybe as well, mate?
Yeah, absolutely. So the DNS configuration is already built in. So if you have a customized DNS operation to be done, that operation can just be configured as part of the DNS block. Now, if I go back into one of our uh, previously finished workflows, yeah, let's see this one. So if you see, one of those workflows is actually add the hostname into DNS, right? So if in case your application needs a DNS update, this particular process is going to go and update the DNS. Now that is already taken care of. We also look at registering to the native network. Now, technically this comes in picture when you have VMware distributed vSwitch running on the production site, and you have an AWS cloud network running in a VPC in Amazon. Now, a virtual machine running in a distributed vSwitch on VMware cannot really be migrated as is into an AWS VPC running, behind a internet gateway. Now that customization is completely done as part of this workflow. All you need to determine is what is the source environment and what is the target environment. Once you have mapped it right at the beginning of the configuration, all of this is done directly, and it doesn't really come in the path of your recovery process. Does that help, Rob?
Beautiful, mate. Yeah, no, perfect, mate. Perfect.
Brilliant. All right. So with virtual business service, what we have seen is an ability to build um, multi-tier services. Now, here I can show you what the tiers look like, what my plan view was. And suddenly, if you see, as we are going through, it has discovered that there is a risk in the environment. Now, that predictability pillar that we were talking about also talks about what are my risks. Now, let's see what this risk is. And here it says that the risk is on the recoverability aspect. That means that my current ability to recover in my DR site is not, is at challenge. And it says that check for net backup notification, and I can just see what the detail is. It says check if the net backup notification channel is added to the net backup master. Okay, so that means that the notification service between the two components it's just trying to validate if the notification service is configured. Now I can of course suppress this risk, yeah, because it's just a warning. I don't really have to worry, and it can then allow me to. I haven't selected it. It will allow me to suppress this risk if it doesn't matter. All right, so that's how that will go. I will then move into one further layer of automation. Now, imagine if you are in a situation where my entire data center is at risk. It's not just about one business service. It's not about one virtual machine or a database. My entire data center needs to be recovered. Now here we actually give the workflow builder. Now in traditional days, and I've been doing the DR, DR planning for almost 15 years. I started my career with 250 page run book, which is the DR run books, and I'm sure quite a few of us here have seen those, where those run books were run every 6 months. Let me see if my data center can be recovered within the SLA that I'm promising to. So that's where those run books came in. Using 250 pages run book is not a reality check today. Those, though, getting out of run books is impossible. So this resiliency plan, or workflow builder, as we call it popularly, gives you an ability to automate your run books in a fairly, drag and drop manner. Let's see how that happens, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a run book. Let me just call this as a run book rehearsal. My objective here is to validate my DR readiness every 3 months. Now, as we said, rehearsals are non-production impacting, right? We don't really impact or bring down the production workloads. So it doesn't matter when I run it, because it's an automated process. I don't need people to, line up their weekends for running the rehearsal. I could just run it. After it finishes, it's going to send me an email if it's succeeded or not. So that's the beauty of that. Now, what here I'm going to do is I'm going to start creating operations. Now you see that there's a workflow builder. I can create as many operations as I like and put in the connectivity. So I'm going to say we just created the business service, right? I'm going to say rehearse that business service. So that's my first task. It will come in as my first block in the workflow. I'm going to say, yes, I created my ERP system. I want to rehearse it. My source data center is New York. My my DR data center is London, and that's it. So my job is created here, right? Now I'm going to say, yep, I had a few other resiliency groups. I want to rehearse those as well. So I'm going to say rehearse the resiliency group, put it in a sequence. Let the virtual business service go next. And I'm going to say, okay, out of all of these, I want the app resiliency group from New York to be rehearsed next. That's it. And then as part of, this process, as I did discuss a little while ago, that after all of this is completed, I want to run my validation. That validation could be automated as well. I mean, it depends on how your automation framework is designed. If you have an automated test suite built in, all you need to do is invoke a script. Now, for the demo purpose, I'm not going to do much. I'm going to say use this host and run a custom script, which is say kept on /opt/ that's it. Yeah, and let me just say what are my arguments. I'll probably take no argument, and my timeout is 1 minute. And I'll ignore this code. Right. So just for the sake of demo, this could be a full-blown test suite invocation that you could build in. And I'm now my moral responsibility that once that completes, I want to clean up all the sandbox. So I'm going to say clean up rehearsal for the business service. So that's pretty good. I've got the cleanup rehearsal for the resiliency group first. I think it was what we picked up was web. I'm going to say data center was, I think it was London. I'm going to say London. That's done. And then I had my cleanup rehearsal for the virtual business service. Yep, this one. I'm going to drag that and I'm going to put that here. So within the last 3 or 4 minutes, I have configured a 3-monthly rehearsal schedule for my workloads. And all I now have to do is connect these. I will just connect these in the order that I want. The custom script validates it. The rehearsal cleanup kicks in. All of this is done. And I can then, sorry, it just needs to finish. Yeah. All right, and I'm going to submit. All right, the plan is created. Let's see what that plan looks like. run book rehearsal. I can see that the plan is created. This is what we did. And I can now schedule it, on a monthly basis or recur every 3 months. That's it. And I now have a schedule. So if you now see, we've simply created using the workflow builder, a workflow that can now abstract. So we started with migrating a virtual machine or rehearsing a virtual machine. We then put that into a business service, which brought in the dependencies. We then put it in another orchestration layer, which is operating on multiple of these. And now we've created a runbook out of that. Now these runbooks, you can actually see and fire these runbooks as much as you want. You can just say execute and it'll fire in. Though given today, I just have 10 more minutes. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I'll still show you a runbook that I run last night. So I've created one runbook which says, this is my entire data center. Was it this one? I think it was this one, or not the recovery module. But this runbook is basically my entire data center, which should have been here, multi-SLA. Yes, this is my entire data center runbook, which now tells me that each and every tier has been migrated as part of my workflow. So 3 virtual machines being migrated, 2 virtual machines, or 2 groups of resiliency groups migrated using Netbackup. So it's a multi-SLA configuration, and you could just run that as part of your evacuation. That could be your evacuation.
Just a quick one,
Yes.
mate. You hovered over one of those machines. It was a database, right? So
That's correct.
The communications that we have with, like, say, Oracle and SQL, we can go that little bit deeper with them, can't we, to make that come up?
That's correct. So the latest release for VRP actually has brought in a direct orchestration layer with Oracle RAC. So, and it's probably a deep dive conversation, but what we can do is, the RAC broker, we can communicate, the VRP ecosystem can communicate with the RAC broker and orchestrate Oracle RAC directly, so without really relying on the underlying virtualization or any other infrastructure, we can talk to Oracle RAC as much. And, based on how the application is, we can configure that. All right, so quickly, if we look at this, we have the resiliency plan that was for the entire data center. Now, this resiliency plan actually has run across multiple technologies, Netbackup, VMware, VRP itself, and at multiple sites. Now, if you see the list of operations that have been run within this, is easily beyond 200. Easily beyond 200. Now, this is where the DR admin, instead of just taking up the phone call and making sure everybody has done their job at the right time without failures, without fat fingers, and bring in that confidence of repeatability, is where the solution gives you the confidence. All right, so the last section I wanted to talk about was reporting. Now, of course, all of this being done, you want to make it look in a way that is presentable to your DR auditor. How can your DR auditor give you a sign off that whatever you've done is fine and we are within our SLA limits? So we clearly have reports which talk about risk assessment. So I can just run a report here, and it will say, what are my risks here? What were my risks in the last 6 months? I can actually run that as well. And, if I show you one of those reports, so here, it will now give me the risk segregation in the last 6 months. If you see here, it says that there were 44 new risks identified, and those risks were so there were 40 in the bucket of recoverability. Of course, you can dig down deeper into what those risks were, and there were 4 risks which were more into SLAs. It then gives you an ability to get into how much time was taken to resolve it, what is your trend in per week, and you can then zoom into what were my risks. So if I just have to show you a quick risk which was around the SLA, I can see the SLA risk here. Now that it says the replication lag exceeded its sorry, it just jumped out. Yeah, so here it says that the replication lag for a particular application exceeded its RPO threshold. And then you can of course go back into the risk panel here and also look at what those risks were. And there are other reports in this which are into recovery assessment. You can actually do, maybe I'll show you one of those in terms of how your SLAs are tracking in terms of your operations. Here you see information around activity distribution, how many migrates and rehearsals and restores were performed, what was the average time, and this gives you your ability to factor in your DR compliance reports. All right, with that said, let me go back to my slide deck and finish a couple of slides that I had. And maybe, again, a gentle reminder, if you've put in your questions in the chat window, we will, given 4 minutes, I don't think we'll be able to address many of them, but we will reach out to you as part of our follow-up when we'll answer the questions. All right, so what we just saw was predictability, controllability, and measurability demonstrated. We saw non-disruptive rehearsals, we saw role-based access, we saw SLA monitoring and reporting. We also saw end-to-end orchestration. Now, end-to-end orchestration, again, doesn't limit yourself to databases or virtual machines. It actually takes it one step further and does your storage as well as network orchestration to simplify your DR process. We saw the workflow builder. Yeah, one thing I have is, we didn't speak about REST APIs, but the solution is backed with REST APIs. So as much as the dashboard was usable, you can always integrate that into your element managers. And, if there is a ticketing system that the likes of ServiceNow can come through as well. All right, and we also saw single pane of glass with risk measurement and compliance and audit reporting. So Rob tells me that there are a couple of questions. So before the questions come in, I wanted to have this one last slide where, VRP supports multiple architectures. So we can do an on-prem to cloud, that on-prem to AWS. Now with Netbackup, for example, what we can actually look at is run a restore in AWS and instantiate that virtual machine, a VMware virtual machine in AWS from a backup copy. Now that architecture or that solution is already in production and is available. So we can actually go and make sure that these restores and rehearsals can happen, including the transition from a VMware into an AWS instance. So, if there are questions around that, please reach out to us. We will make sure we, address your use case, and we'll try to put in, a detailed conversation on the table. We can do, cloud from Azure Stack, AWS. We also support a vCloud Director for private service providers who offer services on vCloud Director. And our AWS integration is actually integrated with AWS Lambda. So it's a scale out mechanism where our replication solution scales on demand, and you can leverage AWS Lambda along with S3 for multi-SLA orchestration. So that said, both marketplaces, Azure and AWS, have Resiliency Platform. Resiliency Platform works in conjunction with Netbackup. So, and the latest Netbackup 8.3 includes this with, the license entitlement includes Veritas Resiliency Platform. So that's pretty much where we are. And, as we've said, the focus needs to be on the service level objective rather than an instance. And that's the beauty of the resiliency platform. That said, I think we are at the top of the hour. this is the ANZ team TL. If you have questions or if you want a follow up of this session and we can do a deep dive with you on the architecture as well, please reach out to us here and we'll make sure we establish a communication. All right. With that said, I'm going to stop here, and we've hit the hour. Rob, how many questions have we left unanswered?
Yeah, we've got two, Amit, but we might be able to touch. There's one pretty simple. I think there's one that you'll be able to answer straight out, and the second one you'll probably be able to answer a little bit more. But I'll, if you've got a moment and everyone's happy to run that a little bit over, happy to answer those, get those questions done if you like.
Sure, yeah, let's do it. I'm good for
Cool.
a couple of them.
Okay. Cool. So the first question was, does the VRP work with encrypted BitLocker disks?
Right, that's a good question. Let's step back and identify what are we trying to achieve with it. Right now, VRP gives you an ability to move, or orchestrate your migration from one side to the other. Now, if the data movement technology, now VRP also supports standard storage array-based replication. I have NetApp storage array, which is configured with Mirror. VRP can orchestrate NetApp as a data mover as well. The use case here is trying to just migrate a virtual machine which is sitting on NetApp and has BitLocker within the virtual machine. That process can still be orchestrated with VRP because VRP doesn't really need to know what is running in the VM. As long as the virtualization layer, it could be Hyper-V or VMware, is able to bring in that virtual machine instance into the operations plane and the underlying replication solution, which is probably NetApp or any other storage array, is able to manage the BitLocker enabled data. We should be able to take that through. But again, as I said, it's
Awesome.
case by case. We can certainly explore that.
No worries.
Cool.
And I guess just the final question we've got here is, what with this availability of VRP, is it capable of providing some kind of advisor on the best path or workflow to follow in the case of disaster, assuming that the customer environment is already into production?
Right. So I have had this question come up in one of my previous customer conversation, and the best way of doing this is actually trusting the heuristics. Now, the beauty of this automation framework is you can configure schedules, you can let it run for months and years, and that builds that heuristic for you. Now, that heuristic in terms of it could be time taken or the error proneness in the environment. That particular view becomes your best guidance in terms of the best path. Now, typically what happens when you're looking at a DR event is you don't really know what has broken and you don't really know what is going to be the best path. So it's kind of an unreliable and not a very deterministic state of the entire infrastructure. At that point, the primary objective of a DR solution is to get you running as fast as you can. Right, and that there we rely on the data that has been replicated and moved onto the DR site. So as part of the solution, we don't really start moving the data as part of the recovery. The data is already moved by the solution and it is sitting on the DR site ready for recovery. So the only thing that is needed is to bring up the work on the DR site. So that's what the orchestration solution simplifies even further.
Brilliant, mate. Thanks for that one. And look, that's the last question we have that was outstanding for today.
Brilliant. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining and thank you for staying back, beyond the time. We, as promised, we will get back to you with the recording and the slide deck, as well as the response to the questions. And then the JB Hi-Fi voucher, we will discuss the questions and we will reach out to the winner and announce the winner with his permission on the forum. All right. Thank you all for joining today. Back to you, Trudy. We'll talk to you in 2 weeks.
Thank you, Amit. Thank you all. This ends our session. Bye for now.